Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal. I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Welcome, Bruce.
Hey, David, how you doing today?
Good, and you've got a new microphone where we continue to up our technological game, Bruce.
Test driving the new mic. This one's got a mute button just like yours.
Yeah.
And hopefully I don't need to use it as often as you've had to use yours with this infernal cold, cough, whatever it is you're suffering from for the last couple of weeks. I hope I don't
Yeah.
get that via Skype.
Well, we did see each other in St. Albert yesterday when I had it over the mic.
That's true, we did.
Yeah, so you never know.
Watch your daughter's team play a little bit of hockey. And I kept a sharp eye on your players' gate, David, just to make sure that you practice what you preach and there was no bad line changes. 'Cause I know how much you hate bad line changes, and I saw none. Got to say, so
it's good you didn't see the game before. All right, Bruce, we're gonna look at a couple of different things today. The Darnell Nurse contract, Connor McDavid's injury, and Adam Larsson's possibility of maybe making a trade of a defenseman, veteran defenseman. Could be Larson, could be Matt Benning, could be Chris Russell at the trade deadline, which I'm now, having looked at it and thought it through more, I think that a trade makes sense. I think that it's probably the right move to make for the Oilers right now. So we'll get your take on that as well. Okay. Bruce, I'll just quickly update. I mean, probably every fan knows already what's going on with McDavid. He hurt his knee in the game against, who do they play? Nashville. And he looked like he was not skating that well a little bit here and there in the game. It happened in the second period. He finished out the game. He came out to practice today. He was out there for the power play, then quickly came off the ice. That was apparently planned. That's what they planned to do all along. They wanted him to miss the rough and tumble. He's saying he's got a Charlie horse and he may miss tomorrow's game against Chicago. So, excuse me. What do you make of that, Bruce?
He's not sure if he's good to go or not for tomorrow, but he did elaborate that the part of the knee that hurts, and he said it did hurt while he was playing through it on Saturday night, but the part of the knee that hurts is unrelated to the part of the knee that was so severely injured last year. And basically he banged the knee into the boards, and he suffered what sounds like a bruise just at where the knee joins the upper leg. And you could just see on the one replay in particular, the left knee, not just a knee, but that knee, hitting the boards first. And I'm sure every Oilers fan winced at that moment. Yeah. And eventually Sportsnet got around to telling us what was going on, but that was for another day. But there's a reason we're paranoid about this guy, especially at this point in time. And I can't help but always go back to your early analysis when he was still in junior that he's Bobby Orr playing center. And we all, well, those of us who are old enough remember Bobby Orr and what he was and still what he could have been, So we always hope for the best health for all of these guys, but especially the special ones.
Yeah. There's some guys like Ovechkin and Draisaitl that are just built like tanks and you don't expect them to get hurt. And other guys are they're just more kind of loose-limbed guys like Orr and McDavid, and you just wonder maybe a bit more prone to injury than, I just think certain body types are more prone to injury than other body types, but I'm no expert on that.
I think it's more of a speed thing than a body type thing. In the case. Yeah, whatever he runs into, he's apt to be going faster than your average bear.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, even your average Ethan Bear. Yes. All right, Bruce. Yeah, so they, not to worry, they've called up Colby Cave, so here we go.
We're covered.
Did you know, Bruce, this year, Kailer Yamamoto, it's a small sample size. Mm-hmm. He, at even strength, he is the fourth leading scorer in the NHL on a points per minute basis. Fourth in the NHL. That's pretty darn good for a young man. Now, it's only 14 games into it. But he's just totally kicking butt. Putting in your earphones there?
Yeah, I'm just realizing I might be giving people enough. I've been so focused on this mic that I forgot to do one of the standard things. So if there was an echo, hopefully it's gone now. Sorry.
Yeah, that would be me talking. Anyway, we'll find out. I didn't hear anything unusual, but maybe it'll show up some other way. Well,
High tech, man.
uh, all right. The Darnell Nurse contract, Bruce. You wrote at
Hmm.
length about it. I had written at length about it previously. I
Hmm.
really like this contract um, because I'm in the camp that sees this as a team-friendly, player-friendly move. Like it's two groups working together on a solution, and the solution is getting Darnell Nurse here long term while meeting the Oilers' cap situation issues. And what I think is going to happen is he'll sign a long-term deal this coming summer after this season when he's eligible to re-sign.
After
But
next season.
yeah, after next season. So some people say, well, oh, geez, it could be like Jeff Petrie. They're going to lose him. But I don't see that. That's not the vibe of this. They didn't particularly like Jeff Petrie in Oilers management. That's why they let him go. They didn't think he was rough and tumble enough. I don't believe. At least I got that kind of indication from them from different things that were said over time. They love Darnell Nurse, and he's going to be an Oiler for a long time. The question is, how do you get him the money that he wants and also fit it under the cap and also make sense for the team? I think this was a good compromise in the short term. And if Darnell Nurse, I think he's got to take his game to another level to get to the very highest level for this
Hmm.
kind of player. Ekman Larson, Trouba, that $8 million a year player. He's not there yet. He doesn't deserve that kind of contract right now. He's got to take his game to the next level. If he does that in the next year, and well, the remainder of this season and all of next year, um, then he can get to that contract. If he doesn't, he's going to be more like a Jeff Petrie. Like he'll get at the lower end for that kind of player. He'll still get very well paid, but it'll be more like 6.5 million a year, 7 million a year, as opposed to 8 million a year. So that's how I see it. What about you?
Yeah, it's a very interesting deal, and it took me a while to get my head around it. I have to say, you may remember at the time I promoted your post on Thursday, I think it was this week, that I said the very last term I was expecting for a Darnell Nurse extension was 2 years because that's the exact time to free agency, and that is very much against the grain of what they've been doing in the NHL. But the more I've thought about it and got my head around it, the more I don't mind it. I mean, one of the options was to give him a 1 year bridge deal to take him up to his last RFA year. But if you do that, when you get to that point, A, you've got an unsigned player. Now he's got arbitration rights. He has the option, the hammer, what I call the arbitration hammer, where he can insist on arbitration, uh, get a contract awarded by the arbiter, and then that takes him to his unrestricted free agency. And it's much more likely to lead to bad blood between the player and the team as opposed to uh, actually doing what the Oilers did and going right through to that seventh year, which is basically what they've done now with the 3 year entry level deal, a 2 year bridge, and now another 2 year bridge. And I can give you a couple examples. Jacob Trouba is a very good modern comparable to Darnell Nurse, and he signed a 2 year bridge and a 1 year bridge. And of course, he did have the arbitration hammer, and he made it fairly clear for a while, I think, that he wanted to play in the States in a major market. And before he even filed for arbitration, he got traded on June 17th to New York Rangers, and they immediately signed him to a maximum 7 year deal, 8 million a year that they had to pay immediately. Like they pay even his last RFA year, he got 8 million. He got 8 million for it. Well, in the case of Nurse, uh, they have from now until June of 2022 is what he signed up for. But the equivalent place where Trouba got traded will be June of 2021. There'll be a year to go. That's when they can reopen negotiations with Darnell on July 1st. They have a year to work it out. I think they'll work it out that summer, and we'll see one of two things. We'll see him get signed to a long-term extension in the fairly early window, or we'll see them say, we're not in the same ballpark. He's up for trade, and they'll move him the way Winnipeg moved Trouba. But it removes that arbitration specter from things, which is just a distasteful operation from everybody's point of view, I think. And uh, the other thing it does is it makes them actually more valuable as a trade asset. Whereas when Winnipeg traded Trouba, Rangers had to pay him right away. If the Oilers were to trade Nurse with a year to go on the contract, the team getting him has him locked up for a year at 5.6. They have time to negotiate, and they also have one cheaper year than the money that presumably he's looking for in the longer term. So those considerations have me sort of rethinking and saying, geez, maybe it's better to have the guy actually expiring uh, at his UFA time than a year before when all that arbitration mess can come up, because they really are going to have the same options in the summer of 2021 that they would have had, had his contract been coming due then, and it's just going to be smoother and I think happier for everyone. So
Yeah, the interesting thing, Bruce, is that you lock a player up for 8 years, like
hmm
McDavid or Draisaitl. The truth is, if those
hmm
guys want out of town, they're out
yep,
of town tomorrow. Like not tomorrow, but soon. Like it's all about the vibe between the player and the team. Do they want to be here? Is it a good fit? Does the player want if
right,
because if the player doesn't want to be there, like Truba in Winnipeg
right.
or Carlson in Ottawa, they
Arguably
find a
Petrie and
way.
Edmonton.
Yeah. Arguably, I don't know if Petrie wanted Pronger in Edmonton is obviously an excellent example. Listen, the players, these superstar players have the cards. If they want out, they're out. So Nurse is a good enough player that if he doesn't want to be, if he wants to be here, he will be here. If he doesn't
Yeah,
want to be here, he won't. And it's as simple as that. You can get all hung up on the long term. I don't think that's important. What's important, like, sir, you don't want to give from the team's perspective too much. You don't want to give a bad contract out, but like the
right.
idea, is he going to be here? Is he not going to be here? That's not really so much of an issue for me. It's all about the vibe. And the vibe right now is this guy wants to be here. So then
Yeah,
the next question is, does cap hit make sense and the term makes sense? And
right.
2 years at 5.6 million for this player? Yeah, I'll take that. Like I guess there's some people who think, oh, you could grind him down and try to get a better deal out of him and blah blah blah. Well, that's going to make a situation where the player doesn't want to be here
Right.
yet, lunkheads, and will try to force his way out of town. Sorry, but that is the truth. And if you want value this player, you want him to be here. You don't be Mr. I'm going to grind you down to 4.8 million or whatever it is, or whatever it is that people want him ground down to. I just think that they're playing fantasy hockey in their head too much, fantasy GM, as opposed to deal with, is this player long term here? Does this cap hit make sense? Does this term make sense? All these things aligned on this deal, which is why I like it.
Well, if you have them in your plan for the long term, you want to treat them fair and you want to treat them with respect. I mean, this
Exactly.
is a real live, breathing human being that some of us seem to forget at times, and on both sides of the table. And they want to have an amicable contract discussion with him in July of 2021. It behooves them today to pay him, a reasonable contract. I mean, when Jacob Trouba 2 years earlier, when he signed his 1 year deal, it was for $5.5 million. It wasn't for 3.6 or, it was same general ballpark as what Darnell Nurse is getting. Now, you might say, well, Jacob Trouba is a better player than Darnell Nurse, in your opinion. And I say, I don't know Jacob Trouba well enough to say that for a fact. But when I look at the numbers, Darnell Nurse can make a pretty strong case for himself. Uh, Going back, I mean, you talk about grinding a guy's gears. After Jeff Petrie's ELC expired, Steve Tambellini signed him to a 2 year extension at 1.75 million per year, which was a hugely bargained contract. But I thought right at that time, and I was proven correct, that opened the door for Petrie's departure from Edmonton. And when that came due, he had 1 year left. He had arbitration rights. He didn't go that way, but basically he told Craig McTavish, I'm only signing for 1 year. And they did what they did. And Petrie was, I think, the fifth highest paid defenseman on that team, and he was basically the best defenseman on that team. And just like last year, Darnell Nurse was the fifth highest player defenseman on the Oilers, and he led the team in games played, minutes played, goals, assists, points, penalty minutes, everything right across the board. And so he's made his case. Uh, because his contract has been incremental, you can't really compare him to Oscar Klefbom, who signed coming right out of his entry level contract. In fact, he was still in it when he got signed to a 7 year extension by Peter Chiarelli. And in retrospect, they projected well on Klefbom, and they got a good bargain deal, and he's locked up long term. In Nurse's case, there's another step yesterday. There's going to be another step in a couple of years' time to lock him up. But uh, they've gotten. I mean, these last 2 years, he's been a bargain at 3.2 million, and I would argue the next 2 years he's probably going to be pretty fairly paid, and then we'll see. The other consideration also that there's a big chance that the salary cap's going to go way up in 2 years when they have that new TV deal. So there may be a little more room to pay the player a bigger contract without it really being a bigger percentage of the cap.
Well, here's one for you, Bruce. I think we'd
Mhm.
agree that Darnell Nurse is like an upper end physical kind of player. He's in the top echelon of NHL D-men for being physical and menacing and intimidating. Okay. Now, a lot
Mhm.
of people don't put a lot of weight in that. I do put weight in that,
Yeah.
but I think it's fair. Anyone would say that. Okay. I think we would also say that he's at least average defensively. I mean, he plays against tough competition. He and Bear play the most against, according to the Wood Money Puck IQ site, they play
Hmm.
the highest percentage of the time against elite competition. So, I think we could say he holds his own. I don't think you'd say he's probably the best defensive defenseman or the worst, but
Hmm.
against tough competition, I think a fair comment is he holds his own. So those two things in mind, we have a defenseman who holds his own against tough competition and is really physical and intimidating. Bruce, in even strength point scoring in the last 2 years in the NHL, Darnell Nurse ranks 40th for NHL D-men.
Hmm.
40th. Jacob Trouba ranks 72nd. Oliver Ekman Larson ranks, I think it's, let me just check, I'll just give you the exact number. Oliver Ekman Larson ranks 95th. Darnell Nurse is 40th.
This is
Oscar
per
Clef
per 60.
per 60.
Right. Okay.
Darnell Nurse 40th,
Hmm.
1.14 points per 60. Okay, so Oscar Clefbaum is 117th at 0.86 per 60. And those guys both play a lot of time with McDavid. I don't think there's one who gets appreciably more time. Maybe Nurse does get a bit more time. I don't know. But they're both getting, I think, good minutes with Draisaitl and McDavid. So Darnell Nurse, we might not love his passing game, but his offensive game, it's top drawer. It's first pairing offense. I mean, he's in the top 40. He's not a number one guy on the attack, but
Number
he's a
one on
top.
this team.
He's number one on this team, and he's a top pairing defenseman in the NHL on the attack for the last 2 years. And he moved up from the very bottom in his first couple years. He was at the very bottom of that category. So he's come a long way. And I don't think people give him credit for that. He finds a way to get it done on the attack. Now, I've criticized him, and I think rightly, for his lack of creativity at the blue line. In this one situation, the pucks pass back to him at the point, and he's really weak. Or he's not very, not really weak. He's below average at making a play there. But other things like jumping into the play, rushing the puck, he can find players with good passes too now and then, good breakout passes like those long bomb passes. I see him make those as much as anyone. So yeah, I'm completely like the term and dollar amount of this contract makes a lot of sense. The whole vibe around this makes a lot of sense. I'm really happy. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just looking at raw points as opposed to per 60. So I'm looking at a different list than you,
Yeah,
NHL.com, and I'm just doing from 2018 till now. So during the time of
yeah.
Nurse's bridge contract, he's making 3.2 million, and he is tied for 17th in the NHL with 52 even strength points. And we'll have just in a little range Victor Hedman, 54, Shea Weber and Seth Jones, 53, Ryan Suter, Darnell Nurse, 52, Ryan McDonough, Aaron Ekblad, and Shea Theodore, 51, Eric Carlson, and Zach Wierenski, 50. Nurse is practically the lowest paid player on that entire list. Like that, those are elite defensemen and elite offensive defensemen. What they have going for them, many of them, is that they run their team's power play, so they rack up a whole bunch of extra points that Darnell doesn't get. And we've talked about this before that we were just as happy Darnell wasn't running Edmonton's power play because he would cost more.
Yeah.
But at even strength, where the lion's share of the game is played, he finds a way to score, and it's not traditional. Like he's not your sort of slick puck moving defenseman, but he does barge into the rush so often, and he creates chaos in the offensive zone. He floods the zone, being an extra man on the rush. Not so often that he'll go end to end with it himself, but he will lug it out of his own end and certainly start the attack in that manner. And he does have some offensive weapons at his disposal. He does seem to somehow get his share of cheap points, but he also gets his share of deserved points. And I don't think he gets as much credit for being as offensively strong as he is. I mean, I was reading tweets last week that said he couldn't make a 5 foot pass. Well, how the hell did he get 52 points in the last year and a half then?
Yeah, and the thing is, well, I don't look at a lot of the underlying numbers, but we keep our own. We
Right.
we look at the major contributions to grade A
Sure
scoring
is.
chances. And Nurse is the best guy on the team. Like he's up there with Baron Clefbaum. They're all really good at that. Nurse is right there with those other two guys. They're the big three on this team.
Yep.
And Darnell Nurse, he contributes to a lot of makes major plays that lead to great scoring chances as much as any Oilers defenseman. And yeah. So this gets to the next topic, Bruce, which is Adam
Oh,
Larsson.
I got one
And
more thing.
oh, go ahead.
Sorry. When we were talking about contracts, I had one more comparable that came up, and he isn't a defenseman, but he is an Oiler, and he's now again an Oiler, Sam Gagner. When his entry level deal expired, 3 years, he signed a 2 year extension, and then he signed a 1 year extension. And then in the summer of 2013, he went to arbitration. And as they were waiting to do the arbitration meeting, they agreed on a 3 year extension at $4.8 million,
Yeah.
meaning both parties were under extreme pressure doing the negotiating literally the last minute. And this is where taking Nurse, like Nurse will never undergo arbitration now. That is a done deal because it's going to be his next contract. He'll be UFA, and that just doesn't apply anymore. So, that's where I kind of think Ken Holland got really creative here and went against the grain and the tradition of how these things are done. But I can see a logic to it.
So when we look, and I agree with that, Bruce. I think I think I made my point on this contract. I like
Yep.
it. Let's just stick with that points per 60 number over the last two seasons because I think it's really a good number for ranking offense over that amount of time. And so Nurse ranks 40th out of 238 regular NHL D-men at that time. Matt Benning is 73rd. Ethan Bear is 77th. Caleb Jones is 104th. Oscar Clefbaum 117th. Chris Russell 182nd. And Adam Larsson 189th. So Adam Larsson is in the top four on the Oilers defense, and he's one of the weaker offensive defensemen in the NHL. And I don't think there's much debate about that, or that's what his point total says, and I think that's what we see. That's certainly what our own analysis of grade A scoring chances shows. That Adam Larsson and Chris Russell add very little to the attack, and that's borne out in their point totals. Bruce, it strikes me right now that Adam Larsson has more value to another team than he does to the Edmonton Oilers. And this is when I think the time is right for a trade. I saw it last year with Lucic. Lucic had more value to another team than he did to the Oilers. The Oilers have tough guys in Cassian and Nurse. Other teams would need a tough guy. And that's why I predicted the Oilers are going to be able to trade Milan Lucic because another team's going to value what he has. I'm seeing the same thing here. Now there's not they had to move Lucic. That was an imperative. It's not an imperative right now to move Adam Larsson. He is a decent NHL player. He and Russell both are great defense, or not great. That's too strong. They are both good defensive hockey players. Against tough competition, they're as good as any Oilers defenseman at limiting grade A scoring chances against. They're tough in the slot. They're smart. They're intense. They're aggressive. They're really strong defensive hockey players. He has value, Adam Larsson, as an NHL player. But I'm not sure that value is there right now for the Edmonton Oilers. They have these other young guys in Jones and Benning who I think are much better offensive players, and the numbers bear that out. And I think I don't think, Bruce, the Oilers can win in the playoffs going forward with Larson in the top four and also with Russell in the lineup. That's one too many guys who aren't strong enough on the attack. I think they got to make sure that they have Jones in the lineup. And if Jones is in the lineup and if Benning's in the lineup, then one of Russell or Larson are sitting. And I'm saying trade one of those guys. Trade either Larson or Russell, or possibly Benning. Trade one of those guys as quickly as you can, because another team desperate for a defenseman is going to put more value than the Oilers have for that player. And if that team also has a forward, you got to trade. You have a veteran forward coming to the Oilers. That's what the Oilers need. The Oilers move out a veteran D-man, and you have a good old-fashioned hockey trade. And I think it totally makes sense for them to do that, and I hope to see that before the trade deadline.
Salary for salary, eh?
Yeah.
You could trade. I mean,
Term for
because
term.
if you're doing Larson or Russell, you're talking about a year plus $4 million to go. So if they clear that out, that makes room for a salary coming the other way. And from the other team's perspective, the same holds true. They can move out a forward that's maybe kind of a fifth wheel in their scheme of things, and maybe they got a hole on right defense or what have you, an actual hockey trade.
Yeah.
And it's possible. Russell, I still think he's more likely to move sometime after July 2nd, after his next bonus is paid, and that'll be a cost-cutting maneuver for both teams. If one's sort of more budget conscious and one's cap conscious, you can do those kind of things. But Larson, he's an interesting case, and I think he has some value around the league. And at the same time, he's had his struggles here, really the last 2 years. His performance on the ice, I think, has taken a major dip. Like, he was very good his first year here in 16-17, and then he had that following year where he had a couple of physical issues, and then his dad died, and things kind of went a little sideways for him. And maybe it's a case where a fresh start would rejuvenate him. Who knows? I mean, that's again, we're talking with real flesh and blood humans here, and I don't pretend to be in his head, but his results. And my friend Darcy McLeod, Wood Guy, had an excellent Twitter thread on this the other day about Larson's goal differential since the beginning of last year, and he's really had his struggles in that department. Had a major net negative at 5-on-5, not plus minus, but specific to 5-on-5 play, getting rid of those bogus minuses for empty net goals and shorthanded goals, and just looking strictly at even strength. He's had his struggles in the Oilers system.
Yeah, so I think there's different analytic schools, and I think different NHL teams will use different analytic methods. I think it's fair to say.
Yep.
And some of them will focus on ice numbers, like how the team does when Larson's on the ice. Others are going to zero in on Larson's actual actions on the ice, his actual performance. I know Arizona has a analytics system that does that, and there's a company out of Calgary run by Brad Warenka that does that kind of thing. So there's different kinds of analytic systems, and I'm saying under some analytic systems, Larson and Russell are going to look better, like better players, more useful players than other under different analytic systems, and it depends which lens you're looking through at that moment. So, and every team is going to have a slightly different lens. Some team is going to have that lens that focuses in on, okay, who shuts down attackers in the defensive slot? Who's a rugged player? And then they're going to have the old-timey hockey thing, like who's a big rugged player who can help us in the playoffs.
Right.
And if those two things come together for a team, and I suspect that the analytics is very sophisticated on many teams, and that will happen, that they are going to identify these two players as being, I think Chris Russell's actually, some analytics systems are going to say, this is a guy that can really help us. He can kill penalties. He's a super solid defender. If we pair him with the right guy in the right situation, he's kind of the guy who could put us over the top in the playoffs. So I actually think, although the talk around Edmonton, because of the Corsi domination of the Corsi school in Edmonton Twitter circles, everyone's Chris Russell is a bad hockey player. I think that's not what other NHL GMs are going to say, and what their analytics guys are going to say. Some of them, they're going to say, this is a guy who can help us. And I actually think he's a real possibility on a trade as well, both he and Larson. The difference with Russell is he's got a no movement clause. So he can only go to, I think, 10 teams at this point. So he'd essentially have to agree to a team if it's not on the list, which is a possibility. But I do think that this could happen. And, I'm not hearing this, though. I'm not hearing rumors that's not to say Ken Holland would give any rumors like that. But you'd have to think with Caleb Jones's reasonably sound play and Matt Benning playing pretty good hockey, they've got to be thinking about this, Bruce, because I think they do need another forward. And I don't think Holland wants to give up futures. And I don't think Puljujarvi's going to do it to bring in that forward that they need. So they're going to have to give more. And I think this might be do the trick.
Yeah, well, one suggestion I heard from people whose opinion I respect is Larson for Mike Hoffman, who's he's a rental in that his contract's coming up this year, not next year, but Florida is supposedly looking for defense, and Hoffman's coming due, and he's $1 million more than Larson, but I mean most of that difference is covered by the guy you move out, and Florida would get an extra year of an expensive defenseman, but one they may feel is worthwhile. And boy, would Hoffman ever look good on the McDavid line, eh?
Oh
But
yeah,
well, it's
that'd
like a
work.
legitimate, proven NHL sniper is uh, is and who's still in his prime, unlike James Neal, who's clearly nearing the end of the line. Uh, it's uh, uh, it's a tempting thought, but I mean, maybe not that particular player, but that type of a deal, and just identifying a team that's looking for a D man or specifically a right D man. If you're thinking of moving Larson, and of course, also all this is predicated on a return to health of Chris Russell, who not only can he not be traded if he's hurt, but the Oilers would be very reluctant to move out another veteran if Russell's out long term, and we still don't know on that front.
That's a good point, Bruce. And that's something I hadn't really factored in. I'm assuming that he will be back sooner than later, but with concussions, you never know.
2 weeks
So,
later, he's not skating.
yeah, yeah.
You know.
Sometimes takes a while. Like Matt Benning was out 2 months, right?
Mhm.
All right,
Yeah.
Bruce. Well, why don't we leave it there for now?
All right.
And thanks for talking today.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll do our normal podcast after game night tomorrow night against Chicago, home game.
All right. And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.